Good evening. This is Peter Helland with Dave Wemhoff tonight on the show Israel. Now, we're not going to be directly talking about Israel, and the reason we have that name for the show is that the New Testament refers to Jesus as the true Israel, and that those who believe in Jesus are become Israel themselves. And that's a whole other subject that we've been working on, because usually people think of Israel in the Middle East or Israel in the Old Testament, but Jesus is the fulfillment of all the Old Testament promises, and he is the true Israel. And when you believe on him, you're grafted into the true Israel. And Galatians 6:16 says the church is referred to as the God. But we're not going to be going that direction tonight. But the idea is to get behind the terms. When you hear the word Israel, get behind it. Jesus said, "I will destroy this temple in 3 days, raise it back up." And they thought they took him literal. They didn't understand what he was meaning. And it's the same with a lot of things. You have to ask, what does that word mean? What are you saying? And tonight, if you look at the subtitle, we chose the subtitle, Illiberal Catholicism. And Dave chose the title. So I'm going to have you kind of bring to the front here.
Okay. Yeah. Let me try to explain it here. The title we took was from a piece that was written by John Zmirak. He's a blogger, and at the end of 2013, he wrote an article on his blog in which he discussed a number of different activities, a number of different articles that were starting to surface in Catholic circles amongst kinkers, or at least those who consider themselves Catholic. And these articles and these incidences that he was talking about dealt with a response to America. And right away, I want to define terms because that's really important. When I talk about America, I'm talking about a society. The United States, or the U.S., is a political entity. It's got laws, it's got institutions. The society of America is based on certain principles. Those principles are then reflected and encouraged and defended and protected in the political institutions, in the political documents that rise to the country, and most particularly in the Declaration of Independence, and also in the Constitution of the United States. So there's a difference here, which I think is significant. However, when Zmirak uses the term America, I believe what he's talking about is a combination of the two, the entire amalgam, if you will call it that. In any event, what Zmirak was complaining was that there was an increasing trend, or tendency among a lot of Catholics to start to question America. And he says, America, and I'm paraphrasing, Zmirak says that America is a synthesis of faith and freedom. And that synthesis of faith and freedom was brought to the fore by John Courtney Murray, a Jesuit. Now, John Courtney Murray lived from about 1904 until 1967. He was very instrumental in bringing about, at least according to some commentators, the document from the Second Vatican Council known as Dignitate, or the Declaration of Religious Liberty. John Courtney Murray was also very instrumental in that he devised the rationale or the justification for Catholics to accept in principle the American or system of societal organization, and also the political or the juridical manifestation of some of those principles. Most prominently, the American or the U.S. idea of religious liberty, and that includes two components. In the Constitution of the United States, both of those components are contained in the First Amendment. It's a good explanation. That First Amendment is a good explanation of the principles that underlie American society when it comes to the area of religious and also to the area of church and state relations. And this is what John Courtney Murray wrote and talked on, church-state relations and religious liberty. There's really two components. Religious liberty, we're talking about the ability to practice your religion, to do what you want to do in accordance with the tenets of your religion within certain bounds. And then you have the issue of church and state relations, which in the American conception of church and state relations, there is no established church. That is reflected in the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment of the United States. Actually, the Establishment Clause is a misnomer. It should be the Disestablishment, because it says that Congress will make no laws, affecting or respecting the establishment of a religion. Well, that can mean a couple of things. That can mean a denomination. That can also mean a creed or a certain set of beliefs. If you take a look at the Indiana Constitution, it's very explicit. They say a creed cannot form the basis of any of the laws. So the Indiana Constitution takes that a little bit further in a way of clarification. So what the Americans say is that religion is a private matter. And this was the principle that was laid out really by Thomas Paine in 1776 when he wrote Common Sense. Common Sense, the pamphlet that came out at the beginning of that year that justified the American break from Great Britain. It led to the Declaration of Independence, and the rest is history.
And, I was just reading there was maybe about 400,000 copies.
That's a lot.
That's 3 million people.
That's a lot of copies.
So that was a well-read. I mean, there's various estimates: 300,000 to 500,000.
So that had a big impact on people. That was really pushed as the reason for the war. And one of the important aspects of American society was that religious freedom had to be maintained. Well, what did he mean by religious freedom? He basically meant the thing that Madison meant, James Madison, who wrote the Constitution, which is that everybody is entitled to worship in private, or however they want to worship. They can worship however they want. That's fine. The government's not going to do that. But that's what religious freedom means. As far as the basis of the laws, well, the basis of the laws are not going to be based on any creed or on any religion. This was the understanding of Madison. I think that's a fair statement of Tom Paine, too. Thomas Paine also, in the ideology that he put forth, and that I call the American ideology that sets forth the basic principles of American society, he established the prime individual. And that is also reflected in the Constitution in large measure. But in any event, let's get back to illiberal Catholicism. What John Courtney Murray did was to justify, with his own theology, this idea that the American system of religious liberty, a disestablishment of any religion and the freedom to worship as you want, was good and acceptable Catholic principle. That's what John Courtney Murray did.
And he was drawing off Aristotle and Aquinas, or he was drawing on...
He says he was. He says he was doing that. That's what he says. But if you really take a look at Aristotle and if you look at Plato, even these Greek philosophers understood that a religion had to be maintained by the civil authorities, to be evoked or invoked by those civil authorities. And Aristotle wrote about it in his book Politics. He wrote very clearly about it. So Murray didn't correctly or completely present the teaching of the ancients. He was there to justify as good in principle the American idea of disestablishment of any religion and the American idea of religious liberty. And he did this, that America is an acceptable in principle, ideal or way by which societies can organize themselves. This then had the effect of putting it on an eating of the Catholic doctrinal teaching of the confessional state. It is Catholic doctrine, and has always been Catholic doctrine, that every society has to recognize Christ and establish his divine positive law as the basis of the law in that society. When you do that, then you have to recognize the Catholic Church and give it preferred status and base your laws, of course, on the Catholic Church, which is the defined positive law of Jesus Christ as interpreted by the Church.
In the Vatican document, did it say Christian church at one point too, or Christian denomination? Or some people might have a trouble with Catholic, like, where does that leave me?
Understand. Well, there was some confusion in discussion of what exactly a Christian is, and I think that to some that confusion extends to today. But what Dignitatis Humanae very clearly said is that our doctrine, our teaching is not changed. It's changed. And that is in the first section of Dignitatis Humanae. That was put in there through, if you're a Catholic, you have to believe in the Holy Spirit, making sure that happened. But the people who actually made that happen were Pope Paul VI, and a name of Francis Connell, a Redemptorist priest who's been lost to history. He was called the Catholic theologian of America, and he resisted Murray's attempts to come up with this new theology. Well, in any event, John Courtney Murray is viewed as the guy who put together the idea in the Catholic mind that America is good in principle, if not also the ideal. So a lot of Catholics have this idea, and they think this is right, and this is good, and this is the kind of system we should work to put all around the world. When in reality, what they should be doing is working to build a confessional state. And the example that Murray and others criticized was Spain. So Catholics should be working to make countries like Spain, really. You say Franco's Spain, and people blanch and they call you names. But Franco did is he established in Spain protection of the church, and also he based his laws as much as possible on Catholic teaching. Sure, there were some problems, and there were, probably some abuses, but we have abuses too in America, and there's no established church to remedy it because you have no moral high ground of the church to deal with it.
Well, I know this. My sister, who went to St. Mary's, she dropped out after a couple of years and lived in,
right,
and she was very liberal, but she marveled at how peaceful it was and how orderly it was.
There's an order to it, sure.
Right.
There was an order to the European societies. Hilaire Belloc said that the Catholic Europe, and that's true. I think you can still see it to this day. There's an order to it. But in any event, so what's happening at the end of 2013, there's starting to be this disaffection among the Catholic intellectuals that John Zemirak is noting. One of the intellectuals is Michael Baxter. Michael Baxter, I understand at one time, and maybe he still is, a Catholic priest, I don't know, but I knew him one time to be a Catholic priest. But he is, according to his article in America Magazine, he wrote an article, he teaches at DePaul University. And it's very significant that he wrote his article in America Magazine, because John Courtney Murray used America Magazine 50, 60 years ago to justify his arguments, in which he said that the American system of church and state and the American system of religious liberty is acceptable or good in principle to Catholicism. So here's Michael Baxter criticizing Murray and saying, Murray was wrong. Murray got it wrong. The Catholics are divided. The polity the Catholics are divided on the American polity. Well, I wrote an article, and I critiqued rather what Michael Baxter said. Michael Baxter said a lot of very good things, some things that were very much correct and on the money. But one of the things, and I think right out of the barrel that I took exception with him on, was the idea of what is the American polity. I think that Catholics, without exception, except for a very small minority, will agree the American Constitution and the American ideology which underlies American society is good in principle and is compatible with Catholic doctrine. They'll disagree, and Catholics are divided between conservatives and liberals, because that's necessarily how they've been divided, and that's how the system works. But they agree that the Constitution is good. They just disagree how it should be implemented, or different policies here and there. So from that point, I beg to disagree with Baxter on the key issue.
Now, how I've kind of boiled it down is that we started out with divine positive law, and I kind of say divine natural law maybe. And with the American Constitution, they kind of pushed that off to the side, or pressed divine law, and it became more secular natural law. Does that make sense? I mean, the natural law, there was different types of natural laws, right? I mean.
Well, that's right. And Baxter points out, and he does a good, I mean, he's really right on with Murray. The essence of Murray's position was the natural law. This is what Father Connell saw, too. He said, John Courtney Murray is basing his entire argument on the position that all the civil authorities have to obey and all the society has to comply with is this so-called natural law.
Right, but there's
that's
divine natural
wrong.
law. There's because I was reading up the definitions, and which, I mean, he's excluding divine natural law, and he's excluding historical natural law, and he's just
Well, what you're touching upon is there are different meanings of natural law. Murray said all a society and a government has to follow is law. Connell and all the popes and Catholic doctrine said, no, that's not right. Natural law should be followed, but the divine positive law must also be followed. They're consistent. Murray stripped away the divine positive law as a requirement of societies and of the civil authorities to follow. There are different meanings of the divine of the natural law. There are different interpretations, equivocal terms.
right, because sometimes they may say divine natural law, or they may say divine positive law, and you're kind of like,
There's natural law and there's divine positive law. Those are the two terms we have to keep in. The natural law means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. There's many understandings of the natural law as there are people in this country.
so basically somebody's taken over. Somebody has taken over that, and it seems to me it's like, this is kind of my thing. It seems like science.
You hit on something very good. What has happened is two things here. Many of the American founders understood natural law in terms of science, in terms of okay, the air blows a certain way, 2 + 2 = 4. There's gravity, things like this. They understood that, and they understood too, in the context of natural, that had an impact on economics too. They understood that too. Okay, so their natural law is different from a lot of other people's idea of natural law. However, the second point you touched on is that the phrase natural law is an equivalent.
Meaning
You can read into it whatever you want.
Yeah.
And so if
people
you
say quit equivocating.
quit equivocating. So a lot of people can buy into this concept of America. You can say America is based on the natural law. Gee, everybody has an idea of the natural law, so we can all accept America. Okay, but the reality is this, that many thinkers today have criticized life in America because they say it's based on a gnosis or a Gnosticism. Well, a gnosis, the response to that is, well, what do you mean by that? But that's kind of a joke, an inside joke. But the Gnostics say, it's the secret knowledge that we have to find.
They were the enemies to Christianity in the beginning.
They were the enemies of Christianity. And what you have is this idea of the natural law, which is incapable of being understood except by those in power. So then truth becomes subject to those in power, and power then comes to determine what is true, what is right, and what is going to be done. Okay?
And it's always changing, because science
always
is always
changing.
inventing and always discovering. So the natural law is always developing, and as new science discoveries are.
Nobody knows what it means. It's evolving. There's a good word. It's always evolving. And so John Courtney Murray's good friend, Henry Luce, said, we don't really know what the natural law is. He says, but we're figuring it out as we go. When Henry Luce said that, and I paraphrase, when Henry Luce said that, he spoke what Henry Luce wrote, but also what John Courtney Murray wrote for him in that speech called The American Proposition. And that was given in 1950 in Rome. to a group of Catholics. So the natural law is equivocal. It can mean a lot of different things. In any event, whatever it means, it's never enough under Catholic doctrine for a society. Okay? Michael Baxter correctly identifies the basis of John Courtney Murray's position. And Connell, Father Connell, identified the basis of Murray's position the same way, the natural law. Enough. You need the divine positive law. So it doesn't really matter what the natural law is, you can have it, but you need the divine positive law on top of it, that's the Gospels. And if you go by just the natural law, here's what happens from a sociological point of view. From a sociological point of view, you say the natural law, we have different meanings of it. What does it boil down to? I don't know. So the powerful are going to rule. From a Christian theological point of view, if you go by the natural law, you got to say, we don't have any duty to Christ because the natural law excludes Christ. And by natural reason, you can determine there was a God, and you should worship a God in your society, but you are not able to determine that there was Christ, and that's St. Thomas Aquinas.
Right, and if natural law, nature's law, I mean, because I was Googling the terms, and well, the laws of nature, that's kind of the area of scientists. And the National Academy of Science, which Kenneth Miller was just given the Latari Medal, and he always at Notre Dame, and he was always referencing the National Academy of Science, who some people claim is the most. And it's 2,200 people, and some people are saying about maybe 7% of these scientists even believe in God. Okay, so that for them, and if they're the determiners of natural law, well, it's clearly even without it, and it's the latest theory of science that they hold to, you know. And theories of science are always in flux. So it's this body of men that we have to trust that are always telling us what the natural law is today.
This becomes the new religion then. That's what it becomes. And then the matter of faith is really relegated to 1 hour a week.
Well, isn't that Benjamin Franklin? I mean, he was the hero for France. I mean, he was the Masonic Lodge in Paris or something. I mean, but
yeah.
All we knew about Benjamin Franklin was he invented the lightning rod, and he was
an inventor.
He was a super inventor.
Yeah.
And people admired him for that.
Yep. He could understand science, and he could make it useful, and so
he understood the laws of nature.
The laws of nature.
Well,
right.
Natural law. I mean, sometimes you get confused with these terms.
You do. That's why they have to be explained, and you have to have one authority who provides the definitive meaning of these terms, and that authority has got to use that term over and over again. That's why language is important. And that's why America is very unique from other countries, because the meaning of words is left to the private realm. In a lot of other countries, the language is watched over, it's controlled, the meaning, the usage of various terms are determined by the authorities. And so this is all part of the American idea of the structure of society, which is to put real power in the hands of private interests, private concerns, which is a fundamental difference from the Catholic view, because the Catholics look at fundamental power in society resting in the civil authorities. That's why when the Fathers of Vatican II came out with Inter Mirifica in 1963 to tell how they're supposed to present the truth and not lie, that's why when the Council Fathers put in paragraph 12 that said the state, the civil authorities are responsible for making sure the media tells the truth. Whoa, well, the Americans came unglued at that one, because that's the base of their power in society. That's their number one tool. It's the use of language and the media and the entertainment industry.
But we criticize Hitler for being the biggest propaganda machine going.
He was a piker. As they say in upstate New York, he was a piker compared to Henry Luce and
he was
Hollywood.
An amateur.
He was an amateur compared to those guys. He didn't know anything compared to.
Yeah, because the Germans were tight as a people, so I mean, how much propaganda can you pull on a society that's very tight? Where ours is fractured. Everybody's an individual, they don't even talk to their neighbor. Isn't it much easier? Well,
yeah, that's true. A lot of people don't talk to their neighbors. That's true.
Right. And so it's easier to
Yeah, it's easier to control it.
In fact, the laws of nature or natural law becomes the manipulation, the scientific manipulation. Because that's what they discover. They discover these laws and principles that govern us, and then they manipulate them to control us. That's kind of what their natural law becomes.
Yeah, it becomes knowing the rules and knowing the ways to control people's perceptions and ideas. And the Americans have had a long history of doing that because ultimately America is a commercial society.
No, explain that just a bit.
Well, it's a society which is based on the gathering, the accumulation of wealth. That is one of the primary principles of it. We are commercial. We're here to accumulate material things.
That's kind of why a lot of people, you envision, they came over here as a land of opportunity.
They came over as a land of opportunity.
And they came over precisely for that purpose.
The founders repeatedly talked about the commercial aspect of America. It's all throughout the Federalist Papers. It's all in Thomas Paine's writing. It's all in the writings of other founders. They saw the commercial value, which means the trading value, your ability to trade with other people. And inherent in that idea is money, is the primacy of money.
So where Christ, his famous statement is, you can't serve two masters. Either you love one another, cling to one, or despise the other. You can't serve God and mammon.
That's what Christ said, and that's.
And you're saying we made a conscious choice, or at least maybe
I think
not for everybody, but our polity was for the mammon.
I think that there was a societal decision from the beginning to accumulate mammon. Wealth.
Wealth, yeah.
Okay, let me just say it that way. There's a way to accumulate wealth in many different ways. But the idea of commerce helps to use words and manipulate words, because with commerce there comes advertising, and commerce implies the power of money and desire to have wealth and create more wealth and to accumulate more wealth. And so what happens then is you need something to create markets, okay, so that you can create wealth. And a man by the name of Amatore Fanfani wrote a brilliant about it called Capitalism, Protestantism, and Catholicism, Protestantism, and Capitalism. He wrote it about 1935. It was his doctoral thesis. Amatore Fanfani was an Italian statesman. He was a Catholic professor. He was with the Christian Democrats in the 50s and 60s. He was very well known. And he was active in Italian politics even until the 1980s. He met Ronald Reagan. And he wrote in this book, he said, there's material desire for wealth that a society can engage in, and that can grow up in a society, but it requires new markets all the time. It needs new markets, and advertising is crucial. So advertising deals with language. It deals with words. Marketing, right. Yeah. It deals with marketing. It deals with symbols and emotions. It deals with terms. It deals with the inflection of terms. It deals with the terms that you use, defining and redefining terms, so that you can create and you can create needs that weren't there before. That's what markets are, needs. Now, so the Americans had years of working on this, and this science was perfected in the early 20th century. And Henry Luce and Time were able to really use this science of manipulation of words, just as the U.S. government was during the mid-20th century.
Now, here's by doing that, they expose themselves to a critique from the Scripture. Okay. Yeah. And it's a famous one. One of my favorite ones, because the King James kind of brings it out in a.
I'm amazed that you're able to just open that Bible right to the passage you want. You really know that material.
Well, I feel because there's, but it says here in 2 Peter, chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "But there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privily shall bring in heresies, even denying the Lord that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction. And many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of." Now here's the verse. "And through covetousness shall they with feigned words make merchandise of you." And then I could keep going on.
So they trade you, like stock. They use you.
Through covetousness, through the have a desire to serve mammon. They're going to come out like they're Christian,
Right.
which means you despise mammon, because that's of the essence of a Christian.
Right.
Love one or hate the other.
Right.
Well, you say I'm a Christian. Oh, that means you love Christ and you despise the mammon.
Right.
Well, so but they don't despise the mammon, but they want to appear as Christians. So they have to. It says through covetousness, shall they with feigned words. The Greek is plastoi logo, plastic words. Make merchandise of you.
So there's the connection between commerce and words.
Mm-hmm.
There's a connection there.
Because they're doing what is called false prophets, false teachers.
And in America, you have from the beginning this intent to pursue commerce, and hence the importance to use words in a certain way.
And that's why Jefferson Davis said it was all about definition of words, because the South had some serious flaws, but the one thing they were conscious of is that the North were lovers of money, and they were purposely agrarian, trying to keep money, the filthy lucre, kind of at a distance so it didn't corrupt them. I mean, obviously, I'm not trying to hide their flaws, but
well, no, I mean there were flaws with the South, but there are good things about America, but what you deal with is we're dealing with doctrine. And so Catholic, if you're a Christian and you read the Sermon on the Mount, you have to ask yourself: Is Christ talking about building a house? Literally, is he talking about that? Well, he refers to that, but it's talking about how we live our lives individually, right? And doesn't that also apply to societal?
Well, I think Americans read it individually, but that's because we're Americans.
Well,
but
because there's a strong individualist tent.
But historically, the Sermon on the Mount as their society.
Societal.
Yeah.
Pius IX in 1864 specifically said that. Paragraph 4, Quanta Cura, he says very clearly, societies make a determination, I'm paraphrasing, societies make a determination whether they're going to follow Christ or God or mammon or wealth. They have to make that determination. But when they follow wealth and they base it on commerce, then words are going to be very important. And so we get back to the whole natural law, this phrase natural law. It's an equivocal phrase. It's used to have everybody buy in to the whole American experiment. And that's part of the genius.
But it's not used by your common people. This is used by the people that are in the think tank.
Supposed to be the thinkers. These are the guys who are supposed to be the thinkers who are using this phrase. Okay?
Where the average person on the street would go,
what's natural law?
Would you explain it to me? Well, somehow they get away with that being asked that.
Right.
And they're playing over here.
Right. So you have to understand what is it that society is supposed to base its laws and principles on, and its statutes. What's it supposed to be based on? The position has always been the divine positive law. That means the Catholic faith. That means the teachings of Christ as explained by the Catholic Church. That has always been the Catholic doctrine. It will always be the Catholic doctrine. That is significant. As Michael Baxter correctly shows that Murray believed that all the society has to believe in is the natural law. And now Baxter is saying what Catholics are divided and they're unable to impart the natural law on the American polity, on the American society. Well, the reason they're unable to impart the natural law is because the natural law is a fuzzy term to begin with. And the Americans and the Catholics are already bought into the American idea, American ideology, the way that America is organized. They bought into church and state separation and religious freedom as the Americans have defined it. And so what the Catholics have done is they have basically surrendered and given up any sort of missionary to convert the society and make it Catholic and make it comply with divine positive law. So what Michael Baxter suggested, he said, well, in order to deal with this problem, which indicates the failure of Murray, now Catholics are divided into liberal and conservative. What we got to do is we got to retreat. We got to go into these little societies, and he quotes Alasdair MacIntyre. He says we got to go into these little societies that are based on the natural law. And I'm saying, go again. You're taking this idea of natural law, which is equivocal, which is a way to get everybody to buy into the American experiment, and you're not just taking it now at the national level, but you're putting it down at the local level. So what you're doing is, while you're criticizing Murray, and rightfully so, your solution is worse than what Murray posited. It's to make the smallest levels accept this nebulous natural law, which means everybody ends up doing whatever they want to do. Everybody's got a different view of natural law. So what I said is what you have to do is you have to go with what Dignitatis Humanae taught. And Dignitatis Humanae was the Declaration of Religious Liberty. And what that said is rightfully so. It looked at humanity and it said man is always interested in the truth. And that's true. That's human nature. We're always looking for the truth. And this was a theme that Henry Luce and American media put out too. But when you search for the truth, you have a right to search, to be unhindered in that search. Then you have a duty. Once you find it, you have a duty to live your life in accordance with that truth and to build societies in accordance with that truth. That's in Dignitatis Humanae.
Once you hear the God, now you're obligated.
You're obligated
to believe it.
You're obligated to believe it. That's correct. And then when you believe it, you're obligated to act on it.
Right, because the word believe means obey.
That's right.
So you can't say you believe and then there's no obedience.
Right. So what is needed is Catholic confessional societies. Okay, let's take it down to the small level. I'll agree with Michael Baxter. Let's pull back for now and take it down to a small local level. I agree. Let's make societies based on the divine positive law, where Christ is the center of their life. And to do that, you're going to need to go into the modern day social catacomb, in my view.
The catacombs that were in the first church. So
That's right.
You're saying we need a type of a catacomb.
That's right, a social catacomb for that.
Okay.
And at the same time, we have to call America to its duty, that society and its government, to its duty to recognize the divine positive law as the base of its laws. Now, you know, everybody has got a duty and a right to work for and advocate for the improvement of the society in which they're living. So this call, Catholics do that. They say, hey, come up, you know, and build upon the divine positive law of Christ. That's just trying to make society better, and they have that right to express that, and that should be recognized and accepted and welcomed, really, by people in society.
Now I'm going to ask you this. I just got back from Tucson. My sister, another sister who went to St. Mary's a couple of years, just got her PhD. So I was there to be the family representative, and we went to the Newman Center. That's where she goes to church there on campus. And afterwards, there was a young guy that was going into the priesthood, and there was a big little gathering with some food. And I sat down with an older lady that's been there. Her family goes back 200-300 years. And she was complaining about the preacher, the minister. And the minister was really preaching that it's only through Jesus Christ that you can be saved. And she was saying, I was looking at my friends and we were all shaking our heads, she said. And she's been through 3 years of the Dominican laity, okay? And she's saying, doesn't he know what Vatican II has taught us?
Doesn't she know what Vatican II has taught us?
If you're a good Muslim, if you're a good person, you can be saved. And she was like really strong on this, and I was reading your article about there's the brotherhood of man, but then the gospel says it's more than just that. You have to accept Christ to become a child, to become a son of God, a child of God. But with the natural law, it's like that's enough, and she's kind of buying into that's enough.
Yeah, natural law just says you got to recognize a God, a deity.
Be a good person.
But if it's just the natural law approach that Murray said that you have to follow to be acceptable, then the government still has got to recognize a God. Well, you got to pick somebody. Pick Zeus. I don't know.
Well, the God could be money.
Okay, make Bill. That's the God. Let's make that very plain.
Well, the GNP. What is it? The GDP. Economy. Our economy. I mean, if somebody's going to run for office, what's their last couple elections? Jobs.
It's jobs.
Well, for me, it's all about I'm here to help you make money. That's what they're there for.
Well, when they talk jobs, they appeal to something, excuse me, very basic, and that is being able to provide, to work and provide. And that is a function of any civil authority, to provide that, to help people to make that happen. I think what you had though at work is, and what I want to get back to here very quickly is, this whole idea of focusing on natural law. Murray was a contradiction to himself. If Murray's position is right that all you have to follow in society is natural law, then you've got to recognize some God. You have to have some public worship of God, societal public worship. But he wouldn't even advocate for that. So
He's just going to let it happen.
he was just there to approve, as in principle, the American system of disestablishment and religious liberty, because they wanted to put it on a par with the confessional state, which Spain and Italy really represented at the time. That's what that was all about. And he worked with people like Henry Luce was his friend, and he worked very closely with Henry Luce, and they traded ideas back and forth, and they wrote things together, published or spoken at speeches, and they coordinated what they did. They sent it back and forth. And Henry Luce was a Presbyterian, okay, and he was his obituary said everywhere he went, or every day of his life, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and how it was the perfect way to organize society. So Murray shared in that, and he wanted to advance that. It's very curious because I point out in my article in response to Michael Baxter that Gary Wills, who was a friend and a colleague of Bill Buckley Jr., the late Bill Buckley, wrote in Worldview in June of 1972 an article where he says, Murray was the kind of guy that worked for the establishment at the time. And to me, as I read Will's article, he seemed to be intimating that Murray was working for the establishment, working for the foundations, intelligence agencies, and advancing this idea of America and its organizational system as good in principle and as the ideal.
And Wills is writing at a time where the younger people are distrusting, so he's got a big audience when he says that.
Well, he says the younger people are now throwing out Murray. That was in 1972. He says they want to go further. And so that's what is the context in which he was writing, which was very interesting, and I think it was a very brave thing for him to say back in '72, because Murray had only been dead about 5 years by that time.
But a lot of your article goes into that that America was going to teach the church instead of the classic way that the church is supposed to teach America or the nations. And in a sense, it seems to me like just being with that Sister Lopez was her name, that this American concept, which denies Christ. In other words, you don't need Christ. In other words, on a personal level, you don't need to be born again. You can be a good person. That's kind of the American message.
Yeah, I think a lot of people look at it that way. They say if you're just a nice guy or a nice gal, you're okay. But what does that mean? You're a nice person. You're not offensive. I guess you don't yell at people. You don't say embarrassing things. What that means. But you touched on a point which I think is important, which is that Murray seemed to reverse the whole process of learning, and he said America's got something to teach us, and we heard a reflection, or an echo rather, of Murray's comments by Benedict XVI when he gave an address to the Curia in 2005. He said, we found out at Vatican II that so much we can learn from the world and from this wellspring of Christianity that can inform government and stuff like that. And I'm paraphrasing. Benedict was taking the ideas that pretty much were put forth by a lot of the magazines that Luce put out and that Murray was somewhat involved in. So you see an echo of what Murray was saying, and that is America teaches the church. Now that's a reversal of what Christ said in Matthew 28:19, which is that you teach the nations. So the church teaches the nations, not the other way around. After Henry Luce's magazine, Time, did a big expose on Murray and his theories in December of 1960, the Pope, St. John the 23rd, came out with his encyclical Mater et Magister, which stands for Mother and Teacher. The Church is the mother and teacher, And his first paragraph, his first sentence, and I paraphrase, I've got the whole thing,
Yeah.
I think, my paraphrase, he says in the first statement, he says, the church teaches the nations. We teach all of you.
Right. I mean, that's. I mean, when you go out to preach, anybody. I mean, if you've sent out to preach, then you're the herald. You can't let somebody
That's right.
deter you and you stop. Well, hold it here. I'm going to stop preaching. And what do you got to tell me?
Yeah.
Well, you already know what to say.
Right.
What's there? I mean, you know the message.
Right.
Christ is Lord. He's King. Every whoever, if you don't confess Him, every tongue will bow. Every knee will.
Right.
Every tongue will confess and every knee will bow. I'm sorry. You know, and that's an imperative. I mean, he has to submit to this.
So what do you think was the response by William Buckley and Gary Wills to Mater et Magister? What do you think was their response?
Well, I remember it was in Latin. It was kind of a play on words. I mean,
Mater si, Magister no. You're not going to teach us. You can be our mother, but you're not going to teach us. You're Mater, yeah, you're our mother. The church is our mother, but that's just some emotional, private thing. But Magistra, teacher, no, you're not going to teach us. That was the heart of the conflict
you know, that's
in the
kind
50s and 60s.
That's kind of like with my dad before he went to Notre Dame, 39 to 43, and you know he was scared of the priest.
Right.
Boy, my uncle went. He joined the Marines, and so he went there after he was in the Marines. And my cousin, my uncle's son, said that the priest tried to tell him something, and he said they just picked him up and threw the priest down the stairs. Well, I'm just saying, that attitude,
That was the
you're not
attitude.
teaching us anything.
You're not teaching us anything.
That was not just nice. I mean, that was.
Well, that's very profound, because this was the heart of the conflict between and the church in the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Right. See, there was a shift.
There was a shift.
There
who
was a-
teaches who here?
Right.
America is this big. We just won World War II. Just fought the greatest evil of all history. Well, look, we're prosperous. Anybody and everybody can live here. You want to be like us? Or you want to be like those Soviets over there?
We're like the Savior. We
We're
just
the
saved the
Savior.
world.
We're the Savior. We're the Savior.
And you're going
right.
to say Jesus is the Savior when we don't see how He saved it. We saved it.
Right, we saved it. That's the idea, right? That was the idea. And that was the attitude, that was the spirit that was at war. And I think John the 23rd saw that. And the American spirit is a materialist spirit. Because, earlier, this desire to be a commercial society was evident in the founding documents and with the founders. So it's a material society. Well,
Or you could say a carnal. I mean,
or you could say carnal, worldly.
yeah.
We could say, and worldly and the spirit don't mesh, as you know from St. Paul's writings. And Amantoy Fanfani noted that too. He said, he's writing in 1935, brilliant man, he's just a brilliant man. He was writing in 1935, and he said, as materialism goes up in society, spirituality goes down. As spirituality goes up, materialism goes down. If spirituality goes down, materialism goes up. So he understood the relation between the two. And I think John the 23rd understood that too. And that's why he called the Second Vatican Council with the help of the Holy Spirit. Because he knew there was this materialism creeping into society. And America really represented that materialism. It said, you can have everything. You can be comfortable, you can be free, you can pursue your religion, you can have a lot of things at the same time, and we can all get along.
One thing too, in the formation of a lot of the clergy and the priests, and it's a lot more materialistic than it used to be.
I believe that, sure.
And that's not probably a plus.
Probably not a good thing, no.
I mean, I've kind of noticed that good examples of people renouncing the mammon.
Renouncing the world.
Like
the
a
flesh.
monastery. I mean, monasteries that you would actually see, or monks you would actually see. We don't see that. So we don't think much, we're not into the denial part that much, because we don't see examples.
Yeah, people who deny themselves are fringe. They're looked at a fringe element. Other people look at them and say, they're kind of odd,
Well, especially to ambition, because what are Americans really? I mean, since there's no real set structure, we're tempted to try to be ambitious, because I can get up here.
See, I think that the Catholic leadership understood that. in the 50s and 60s. And when I say the Catholic leadership, I'm talking not just about educators and clerics, but I'm also talking about the laity. There's a lot of laity who do very well in this system, okay? And they understood that the American way of organizing society is different from the Catholic way. And the American way of organizing society is uncomfortable with the Catholic way. So if you say you want to organize society in accordance with Catholic teaching, well, that'll make Americans at very high levels very uncomfortable, because one of the things that disestablishment of a church or a religion does is it takes away all of the moral authority of religion, which means that religions just become another competing interest group. They all like the system because they can all go out and recruit however many followers they want, build however many churches they want, but they really don't have an impact on the laws. And Supreme Court decisions, as we've talked before, have limited their impact even more. And religion and a creed is not supposed to inform the laws, as we talked about Madison and as Tom Paine saw it too, and other founders. So, in order to really to be accepted and not upset people at very high levels of American society, you have to say, you know what, the Establishment Clause is a good thing, we're all for it, don't change it. And that's exactly what the Catholic leadership said in the 60s, okay? That's what the 1960 election was about, is can a Catholic be an American and serve at a high place? Well, everybody talks about JFK's speech at Houston on September 12th of 1960, where he said, as a Catholic, my religion's not going to inform the policies that I try to implement. But what they forget is what a lot of other things that happened that autumn in September and October. You had on two separate occasions, you had Catholic leadership sign petitions saying we love the way the First Amendment is, we will never strive to change it, in that we'll never establish the Catholic Church, we'll never establish the confessional state, we surrender our missionary mandate, essentially. That is glossed over. What's also glossed over is a talk that was given a priest by the name of Gustav Weigel, a friend of Murray, who said that, Catholic politicians have got to be divided. You have a private life, but then, your public life has got to be based on whatever is out in your faith. Okay, and the hierarchy was completely silent. The hierarchy said nothing. They allowed Weigel's statement to stand as a definitive statement of church policy and of church doctrine, and so they must bear some responsibility too for what has happened.
And Mario Cuomo, I was there, gave the big speech.
That's where Mario
he
Cuomo
said,
got his idea.
I'm against abortion privately, but I'm for it publicly.
That's right.
So,
are we running over on time?
no, we
lost track of time.
had a thought in my head there, and it just slipped me.
I was talking too much.
No. So what are we looking at here? That the Catholic. When Notre Dame honored Kenneth Miller as the evolutionary biologist, and he's noted for keeping creationism and intelligent design out of the classroom. Radical separation of church and state. I mean,
sure it is.
In other words, the impression is being given that evolution is radically true. That Notre Dame had with the Pontifical Science Division in the Vatican in 2009, and they didn't want any. Even then, they still didn't want any creationist or intelligent design people there. It was on biological evolution. So, I mean, God's is the creator. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me that that's how we address God. He's the creator of heaven and earth. And yet, that's kept from us. That our parents, Adam and Eve, are not real. I mean, they're not real enough to be at the table.
That's really what the evolutionists are saying. That's what you're saying. The evolutionists are saying that Adam and Eve were not real.
Oh, no, right. And if you believe in evolution, no one really sees, you can believe in the Adam and Eve of Scripture. You may have an Adam and Eve of evolutionary thought, but not the Adam and Eve that Paul and Jesus and Peter proclaimed.
Which is hard to understand, I suppose, how you can have an evolutionary Adam and Eve. But it all fits into the idea.
Well, Adam came into being through the process of evolution, where in Genesis 2:7 it says God made him from the dust of the ground, and that used to be Catholic doctrine. I mean, if you read the old Catholic...
It's just whether it's actually presented by people is something else. The doctrine can't change. What's on the books is on the books. It can't change. Now, what people say is on the books, that can change. Okay, and that's where the confusion comes in. And that's where something called Americanism that Leo XIII, a pope, found out was really problematic because people were presenting things in certain ways that caused confusion and such.
We're going to have another show on that aspect, because we only have like a minute left.
Okay.
But I know you're working on a book that touches on a lot of this.
Yep.
And so we can have prayers for the success of that book, because you're forging some new territory.
Well, I think I'm just uncovering old territory that's been covered over.
You're researching. Okay, so this is the end of the show called Israel, and hopefully we'll be back on soon, and Dave will be back on again also. So until next time, Jesus Christ bless you.
This is Antwerp, Belgium. Tell me about that, the victory ship.
Oh, yes. And what they call some ships put together by the Kaiser Corporation. They were actually just freighters. The last one were called victory ships. Excuse me, victory ships, and they loaded all the guys on board, but they didn't put enough ballast in. And three of us pulled out of New York in March, heading for New York. Took about 13 days for my ship to make it.
Wait, where did you leave from?
Antwerp, Belgium. One ship broke down about the first day. The second broke down about the third day. And the ship I was on kept on going. And it took us 13 days to get to New York. It was quite an experience, because being so lightly loaded, it would heel over, the propellers come out of the water, and it would shake like I don't know what. And it was an interesting ship, especially when you weren't leaning over the rail.
Tell me about getting back and being offered steak.
Oh, yeah. We ended up coming naturally through Queen Elizabeth. The ship should have turned over, because everybody was leaning on the rail looking at the Statue of Liberty when coming back. And they took us to Fort Dix. And at Fort Dix, they give you vouchers to get a steak and all kinds of the good stuff. But for me, I said, I wanted a hot dog, a malted milk, and a hamburger. And that's what I had.
So how long were you gone? And from the time you saw the Statue of Liberty the first and second time?
20.
Wait. And then tell me what you thought when you saw it again.
22 months. I've gone 22 months over in Europe. And she's a beautiful lady when you're coming back after a situation like that. You just stand there and stare.
And so tell me about coming home and seeing your mom again.
Okay. We were on a train that we had to go to, although I'm from, we had to go to Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. But the train stopped in Chicago, and I jumped off and ran into the station master office to call my mother. And then I come back and got on board, and I come back, and when we got our discharge, took a train back to Chicago, and couldn't wait. We had to catch a cab, run home to embrace your mother and your girlfriend and everything.
And so tell me about your mom crying
Okay.
when she found out you were going to leave.
Okay, as a kid, and I'm sure a lot of kids feel this way, that, well, number one, I have to say that my dad passed when I was 12, so my mother had the job of raising my sister and myself. And she did not waste time disciplining us. There was a hairbrush she used on me that when I got a chance to throw away, I burned it and had a ceremony. But where you did it, that's where you got it. But so naturally, being a stern disciplinarian, you had this feeling, she doesn't love me. But the morning that I was leaving for the reception center, I went in to tell her goodbye, and she's laying up in the bed crying. That's when I knew that she loved me.
And so was it hard for you to leave your mom?
Well, yes, but you do what you got to do.
And so how did the time in the service change you? What did you learn? What did the Army teach you?
That you can do anything that you have to do. I mean, you can't run around saying, I can't do that, I can't do this. You depend on the other guy. You learn to be able to do things that you thought you couldn't do, and you learn to just get along with people.
And so what did the Army teach you about life?
The main thing